Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets deal with a slew of injuries by losing to the Bulls significantly 128-102. A reminder that it's hard to navigate this season when you don't have the top talent and when your best talent is on the bench. We dive in next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. And Doug, this is the slide that we knew was coming at some point. 3-game losing streak. Really another non-fun watch for the Brooklyn Nets. And with everybody basically being out, we do get the return of Day'Ron Sharpe for the first time this season. We also get a taste of Dariq Whitehead coming up from the G League. So there are some things to discuss, even though at a high level, this was a pretty brutal loss to the Bulls.
Yeah, look, they entered the game. No Keon Johnson, no Dorian Finney-Smith, no Cam Thomas, no Noah Clowney. Like this is what happens, right? We talked about this multiple times over the summer. We talked about it early in the season. Is that seasons are long, 82 games, and the Nets jumped out to considerably better start to the season than anyone really could have ever imagined. But we're starting to see sort of what happens when we get into no one's all that motivated to push through injuries, and the team isn't very good on a talent level when certain guys are out. And when you get a lineup of Dennis Schroeder, Tyrese Martin, Keon Johnson, Jalen Wilson, and Nick Claxton, I can kind of tell you what's going to happen. And and it's a testament to this team that they fight really hard and that they do stay competitive for like longer stretches than most would imagine. With a crew of later round draft picks and sort of NBA castoffs for the most part. But this is kind of maybe what the new normal is going to be for this team. Like they just are talent wise. Completely, Ziaire Williams out too, like completely undermanned, and it's just very tough. Like NBA is kind of a solved science. Like even on a team like against the Bulls, who are trying with their own, set of maybe personnel issues. This is just kind of going to be the exception. So they get blown out. Not really all that surprising.
Yeah, that ends up being with Thomas, Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, and even Ziaire Williams, who's like really the 10th highest point getter for them. But that's 3 out of your top 4 point scorers for this team not being there, in Thomas, Johnson, and Dorian Finney-Smith. So it's going to be more difficult. And I think just in this game too with Chicago, they were in it, by the way. They hung in there through the first half. Yeah. It's the third quarter where it really falls apart for them. They give up 36 points in each of the final 2 quarters of this game. So you saw it coming in the third quarter. But it's the reminder of, because you mentioned they were still hustling, they're still playing hard. Yeah. But when we talk about a team that, hey, every single night they're going to be competitive. Well, we've all come to accept with Jordi Fernandez as the head coach and a healthy roster, there's not a single team in the NBA that on any given night the Nets will not give an incredibly difficult task to of beating. We watched it against Phoenix. We just saw it on the West Coast trip with those 3 games. Conversely, though, as we've also said, take away a couple of the key contributors, and you see the bottom fall out somewhat significantly when you don't have Cam Johnson, when you don't have Cam Thomas, and mostly because the offensive end is always going to fall apart here. And then not only that, with no Ziaire Williams and his athleticism, even Dorian Finney-Smith and his length, you also saw defensively in this game against Chicago, it was a size mismatch at basically every position across the board. And it grinds you down, I think, where the first 24 minutes maybe looks competitive and you squint and try to see if they could start to make it a game in the second half. And then the third quarter happens. You go, yeah, that pretty much feels about right. A lot of inside-out play in that third quarter from Chicago. A lot of wide-open looks and some defensive assignments where you're trying to – it was familiar like last year, trying to scramble to close out as opposed to being in the space ready to attack that defensively.
Yeah, you have guys who haven't really played together. You have guys who haven't played a ton of NBA minutes in general, right? And then you get, you talk about size issues. I mean, Ziaire, you mentioned about how he is, lower on the points, per game scale, but he's also like a very incredibly key part of like what they do defensively, right? On a game-to-game basis, can guard opposing ones. Like he would have fit right in. He can get out and transition on hit-aheads. Like he would have been pretty crucial to have in this game, I think. But in general, when NBA seasons, you tend to regress to your talent mean. Like whatever your talent is, you're going to pretty much probably land there in the end. You can run a little hot on 3-point shooting. Maybe you run a little hot in close games. Like you can have some of these things, have the ball bounce your way a little bit. But over 82 games, if this is going to be your lineup, again, I can kind of just tell you what's going to happen. It's one difference between, say, an NBA season and then the playoffs really play out this way. Or like college basketball and then the NCAA tournament where it's like, hey, can some team just reel off a few wins by running hot in a short period of time? Yeah, for sure. Right. But if we just the bigger the sample size we get, the more we're just going to sort of find out. We don't even need to find out. We're just going to know what this is like, where this kind of level of talent is going to end up being. And that's just going to be the case. Again, when you're a tanking team, that's fine. Like, this is just a fine result, especially against a team who you might be like, battling for lottery odds later, possibly with the Bulls. Like, taking the L here isn't the worst thing in the world either. But, just again, read off the names of the guys who played here. If back in the beginning of October before the season started, if we told you, hey, here's the starting lineup for tonight's game, it's December 3rd, and I just reeled off the names I reeled off to you before, like, this is like, you'd be like, oh, they got crushed. Yeah, correct. They got crushed. Right? Like this is just not, it's barely an NBA level of talent of a team.
Yeah, of course. And even in games like these, though, you still do get, and we've done this in other losses, whether it's individual performance. We're going to talk about Whitehead here coming up in a second. But you look at the veterans, right? Dennis Schroeder, well, he played 29 minutes, went 7 of 15 from the field, struggled from deep, but gave you 10 assists, 16 points. Like, you still get that consistency. Another veteran like Shake Milton, who comes in off the bench and has now put together a couple of nice games for himself. He ends up going 35 because they're trending in the direction of a loss late in this one, but also gave you 6 assists, gave you 6 rebounds, 14-point performance for him. So there is that push and pull here when you lose some of the guys from a health standpoint. Now you start to, to me, a game like this is, well, you don't worry so much about young development necessarily as you worry about, are some of our veteran players continue to showcase value potentially? Do they look like no matter what, no matter who's around them from a personnel standpoint, they can still make an impact? So you saw one of few veterans like Schroeder say, okay, I'm going to try to drag us along here at the back end of this game to try to get us across the line. And it still does, for whatever it's worth, this game still did not lack effort. It didn't lack hustle. Yeah. And you also mentioned, by the way, that Chicago, you talk about battling inside of the, where we're going to land in the old ping pong ball category. Listen, we don't know if it'll end up mattering at the end of the year, but the fact that Chicago beat the Brooklyn Nets last night meant that Brooklyn went up to the 8th spot and meant that Chicago dropped down a couple spots, still at 9 and 13. But then you get into the strength of schedule stuff and you start talking about splitting hairs here, Donnie. It does become that very narrowest of margins that could separate you. So it's funny to see two teams, Chicago mostly healthy, and you see Levine and you see Ball and you see Vucevic, and you go, yeah, if these guys were totally healthy, this might be one of the more entertaining 7-game series that you could have in a non-playoff related atmosphere. So it was fun to watch it and see some of these veterans still put some good film on tape. We'll find out if that matters when it comes to the deadline. Here in a second, though, Dariq Whitehead. He was called up a few games ago, riding the pine, finally gets the chance to start. And gosh darn it, if he doesn't give his best impression of Tyrese Martin. We'll dive into that here coming up next.
Before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Look, Prize Picks made daily fantasy so easy. All you can win right now, you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as few as 4 correct picks. It's the best place to get real money sports action. You can join over 10 million users. Sign up today. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks made this so easy. All you're doing is going more or less on the Prize Picks projections. All the stats you love too: points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals. That's for the NBA. NFL, you got, passing touchdowns, rushing touchdowns, yards, it's all there for you. Made it so easy. You're not wrangling with salaries. You go to Prize Picks right now, you can go more or less on Victor Wembanyama, 24.5 points. The guy's been absolutely crushing it this season. Karl-Anthony Towns, friend across town, 11.5 rebounds. Let's go less on that one. We're never on board for anything the Knicks are doing. That one makes it pretty easy. Right now, you're going to go to Prize Picks. You're going to download the app. You're going to use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA. Get $50 instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. And when you're done with that, head on over to our friends at Gametime. Look, you're going to the game, the concert, the theater, the comedy experience, whatever it is you want, the buying tickets to be made easy. You want to know you're getting the best deal. You want to know you're just going to be able to see exactly what you're going to see when you sit down in those seats. Gametime, check. It's all there for you. Go to Gametime right now. Got a bunch of Nets offers here. You cannot beat this one here. Indiana Pacers at Brooklyn Nets Wednesday. starting at $5. $5 for a Brooklyn Nets game. Come on, stop it. Bucks at Nets a little bit later in the week, starting at $28. Still, I mean, you're not going to find better deals than this. $5 for a basketball game. Come on, stop it. I should stop the read right
I'll
here.
Go to 5.
Wow, it's insane. Actually, I'm stumbling a little bit because of how insanely great these prices are. Like Game Time Picks makes curation, makes it easier to save in sports. Like I said, concerts, comedy, whatever it is. You got the all-in pricing. You got those seat views. You got the lowest price guaranteed. You're going to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, coming off the loss 128-102, the Chicago Bulls jumping in just 3 games, Doug. The Nets have gone from 15th to 8th in the lottery, back in the lottery, I should say, back into the conversation for that top pick. And while, yes, we'll still be always looking up the board there and saying 9 wins compared to Philadelphia with 4, Utah as well, New Orleans, and then, of course, the kings of being awful, the Washington Wizards, losers of 14 straight. So you can't battle those guys. Those guys figured it out very early in the season. However, in this game, we also got Dariq Whitehead called up from the G League a few games ago, didn't get into any games. And then this is, of course, the spot. Wow, carefree, get out there. For whatever it's worth, he has not been necessarily good or great in the G League, as we often talk about, dominate there to validate an opportunity at the NBA level. But he came in, took a ton of 3-pointers, knocked down 6 of them. You can't ask for much else from a player that we unfortunately looked at, coming out of the draft, the first year, the injuries, the play, summer league, and just kept trying to squint and say, how hard do we have to look in order to see a player that can come back around here and find some form?
Yeah, I mean, a great sign for him to come up and play some of his first, not his only real minutes, but some of his first real minutes for sure, like not in the end of the season tanking mode. But
Yeah.
Well, I guess he was injured at the end of the last season, but 24 minutes, scores 18 points, 6 of 10 from 3. He has. I was going to actually mention this last week, or no, a couple weeks ago, but we just the schedule kind of ran out this way that we've taken a look at Long Island, like some of the stats from Long Island, and he really wasn't popping off the page. And we were going to make a note to be like, hey, should we be worried about this? Because, like, again, to be good in the NBA, you have to crush it at the G League. Like, you just it's very hard to be mediocre in the G League and then just come to the NBA and be good. It just doesn't make sense. The talent level is just such a precipitous drop off. And I will say, like, his G League stats are basically being propped up by like one game, right? He had not in his last game in the G League on the 24th, he went 9 for 18, 6 for 13 from the field. That's good. Like, you want to have that in your bag for sure. The shooting still probably needs to come around. So I'm tempered on my excitement for this. Again, great to see it. A lot of minutes, shot well. He's got the high arcing shot. Looks pretty good coming out of the hands. I'm still being like, ooh, let's just we got to see 100 minutes of this, 200 minutes of it to be real about it. That being said, you can't start off better here from a shooting perspective. And if the shot can be there for him, then we're talking about something real, right? And I just hope he gets to play a lot more. That's my real hope, is that he's with the team. He's been there consistently. He's been on the bench a lot and just not gotten into games. So I just hope that this is a more consistent thing here as the injuries pile up.
And listen, I mean, you're not going to necessarily go too deep on it when it's coming off a game like this, but in 24 minutes, he also had, the 1 assist. Okay, fine. But a block, 2 steals, you forget, because he's kind of a slight, or at least seemingly a slighter frame guy, but he is 6'6", and you are talking about the ability, the way the lineup is currently constructed, or if 100% healthy, you can stick him in the backcourt maybe. And you don't have to think too hard on, well, if Dennis Schroeder gets traded here at some point, you're in the back end of this season and nothing really matters in terms of wins and losses. Can you go ahead and see whether or not Dariq Whitehead and Cam Thomas can run in a backcourt together and what that looks like? Yeah, you'd like to be able to see that, but not unlike, oddly enough, fellow G League, teammate Killian Hayes, I got to know that you can do it. I got to know that you cannot be the zero. We talk about this with Ben Simmons all the time. Doesn't matter if you do some things well. If you can't do the scoring part, it's just next to impossible to stay on an NBA court unless you are elite of the elite, or you're trying to tank, and then you'll go ahead and run Ben Simmons out there no matter what the situation is. So I would love to see, to your point, I don't know if because we debated this before too. I don't know if I prefer him being at the G League and trying to show that he can dominate there, because the sample size, at least early in this season, hasn't been excellent, or if I like him on the bench and around these veterans and just saying, hey, be here, see what they're doing. I don't think it's about work ethic or about effort or any of those things, but maybe some of that just runs off of it. Maybe there's better, I mean, not maybe, there is definitely better knowledge base if you're sitting on an NBA bench with Schroeder and Johnson and some of these other vets there, even Ben Simmons as well, to coach you up and maybe help you improve your game in certain areas that would take you longer developmentally at the G League level. So I'm fascinated to see with the injuries how the Nets approach Dariq Whitehead and whether or not he starts to get a little consistent run here, even if it's very small minutes or even if it's, garbage time effectively on a night overnight basis.
Yeah, you get put in a tough spot with these guys because on the one hand, you sort of need the bodies, right? The Nets only have so many options here, especially when the injuries pile up. So they need to have sort of break glass in case of emergency dudes around to be able to play. But then when you're one of those guys, you forego playing time because you just can't be in two places at once, right? So he's only played 6 G League games out of the 9, and he played tonight or last night, but that had been like 9 days since he played. Right. So it's because he played on the 24th in Long Island with Long Island. And now it's, December 2nd. And that's that's just a tough spot to be in because you're not out there.
Now it's no reps.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. You're no reps. You go from, so which is better? I mean, you prefer to just be like regular, especially with his sort of just how he's come along and the injuries and Duke and everything like that. You'd like to just get all the encore time in the world. Like he feels like one of these guys that's what he really needs the most is just to play a lot. But you get put in these tough spots because you can't just do 10-day contracts. Like you just can't. Eventually, you just run out of guys. You just run out of guys that can effectively play. And I think he's probably one of these guys that's just in an unfortunate spot right now. But that's the hope here is like, hey, if these injuries are just going to keep around, keep kind of going or trade. I mean, one trade and it's probably all solved. But again, like that just might not happen in the short term. So we might just be pushing and pulling here in terms of like what the consistency around his minutes is going forward.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because you don't have to look too, like we mentioned, Tyrese Martin obviously has that monster game, right? 30-point performance. And I don't think we may mention it on the podcast, but just that after that game against Phoenix, Keon Johnson was in the locker room and like signaled to everybody with the water bottle, awesome. Like, here he comes, let's go. And they all hyped him up and it was awesome. And you could see how everyone was excited for him and he was jacked up because it was like, hey, it's
an awesome video.
I'm an NBA player. You can't get rid of me now, right? So that was just a really special moment. I want to make sure we mentioned it. But then you go beyond that, though. Okay, so the next game against Orlando, Tyrese Martin only scores 8 points, but he shot 3 of 8 from the field. He was 2 of 4 from beyond the arc. There's something there. Barely plays against Orlando in the second game on Sunday, but comes back in this one, 33 minutes, 5 of 12. Out of necessity here, 3 of 8 from deep, gives you a 15-point performance. So I think it's hard because Tyrese Martin, by and large, not an unknown commodity, but he's 25. He's been around the game, right? He's primarily been a G League lifer. So he gets this bubble up opportunity and he's taking full advantage of it. You love to sit here and say, okay, Dariq Whitehead, maybe it's the same kind of thing. It may not be night overnight consistency, but as you said, as long as it's not a long 9-day layoff or he doesn't find himself riding the pine for 3, 4, 5 straight games, then maybe you can just get these little sample sizes that show you the flash and justifies keeping up. Because you and I talked about this when it was Noah Clowney a year ago. I thought, bring him up after the All-Star break. Like, let's start to get this kid going. It took longer. Now he had some great looks as he got into the end of the season and the Nets were, officially out of it. But I would have liked to have seen him sooner. Different for Dariq because we've gotten some big samples and they haven't been great, mostly in Summer League, etc. But I'm always going to have a hard time as long as the minutes, however small they may be, 7 to 10, I'd rather him get 4 minutes to 5 minutes a night at the NBA level consistently than see him at the G League until the final 10 games of this NBA season. The other benefit, again, as we always say, same thing with Clowney, he's still only 20 years old. So there's a very long runway on what his value is. And we talked about at the time of the draft, incredible prospect. The injuries are what derailed his value. So there is that lack of pressure to utilize him before they feel he's 100% ready. And I think the organization clearly has that in their mind with him because they saw it was an ugly start. So how do we make sure that we incrementally build this kid up in a good way so that he can have success with this team potentially going forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's the key too. It's just like, good point about reminding everyone about the age too. Like he's just is young. He was the youngest guy in the draft. He and Clowney were the 2 youngest guys in the draft. They're still, could be basically like college sophomores, honestly, or like college juniors. Like they're really super young. So not worried about that. It's mostly him. It's just like, he just hasn't had, just because of the injuries and stuff, he just doesn't have as much on-court time as most of these other guys, even with his age. Like most other guys have just played more than him, just because he's suffered these the foot injury stuff has been just sort of ongoing basically since he left high school. And so that's the only thing too, is like he just does need as many reps as possible. All right, we got some more stuff. We're going to talk about little
28
Day'Ron
games in
Sharpe.
college, by the way, just that little button up there.
28 yeah, which is like nothing
in college. So even small in college and then comes to the pros
and lower minutes in those in those games. Like he didn't even run crazy minutes at Duke. So he just has way less like competitive time on the court than most other guys his age that are at this level already. All right. We'll talk a little Day'Ron Sharpe here in a second. But first, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at BetterHelp. The show's sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, it's the bookending by the holidays right here. Between Thanksgiving, we got the holidays coming up late December. You want to stay cozy for those winter months. Maybe you're wrapping in that blanket. You're like I'm with the kids with a mug of hot chocolate. You're watching the movie. It's the best way to spend the month of December. And therapy is a great way to bring yourself some comfort that never goes away, even when those seasons change. Look, if you benefited from therapy before, or you're just trying to get started, it can help with so many different parts of your life. Coping skills, how to set boundaries, empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just if you experience major trauma. Like we could all use someone to talk to in our life to just figure out how to get that best version of ourselves unlocked. It's something you can definitely think about around these holiday seasons as well. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try entirely online. Totally convenient. It's flexible. It's 100% suited to your schedule. You just fill out that brief questionnaire. Get matched with a licensed therapist. You switch at any time. It's no additional charge. BetterHelp is there for you and is going to work with you along the way. Find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, so as we wrap up today's Locked On Nets episode, 128-102, the Nets lose to the Chicago Bulls. They move ahead of them in the lottery standings. And just like that, as I say, 3 games, the Nets go from middle of the first round to top 10 pick. So that's how quickly this stuff shifts, and why I think you and I consistently, episode over episode and week over week, even if I get excited and I want to, support the team and take all the wins, realize that the season is long and this stuff tends to work itself out in the big picture. We also did get, and the reason why we waited until the third segment here to bring it up, we got the return of Day'Ron Sharpe. Not surprising, only 16 minutes. We saw this with Nicholas Claxton when he was coming back. There's not been any sense of push or pressure to play big minutes in their return. He goes 0 of 2 from the field. 4 of 4, Doug, at the free throw line. Gave you those 4 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, a steal, a block. I mean, some of the things that we're just used to seeing from him, but it'll probably be, I would assume, a couple more games before we see really, consistent minutes from him. Although this remains the question for us, right? What is his role? And maybe all these injuries end up playing to his benefit in his return, because there's just going to be space on the floor for him to occupy if he can show some consistency.
Yeah, 16 minutes out of the box is great. Again, it's a little hard to tell what the plan is because so many guys are injured. We saw late last season that they weren't totally committed to playing him tons of minutes in a time where we thought they would. And so I think I'm still waiting. It was kind of waiting to see what the real plan is here, which we might. It's hard to know. Like the key is here. He played 16 minutes, looked rusty for sure, to be expected. Hadn't really played in a really long time. Like the timing was a bit off in places. He only had 2 rebounds, but he was way close to a lot more. I think that like this was one of those things where this easily could have been like 6 rebounds in 16 minutes. And we know already that he's when he's been on the court, he's been one of the very best like per minute rebounders in the game. Like Drummond's another one of these guys. Sharpe just lives in this like top 5 per minute rebounding rate. And that's for a team right now that is awful at rebounding. And by the way, awful, that's probably an understatement. They sit dead last in rebound percentage this year, which is pace adjusted. I mean, they sit dead last in rebound, also just in rebounds. But sometimes it's better to look at the rebound percentage just because, some of these teams just have chances to just pile up based on pace. And Nets play a slower pace too. But yeah, they sit dead last. It's kind of not close. And so they've just had rebounding issues all season long. And when you start Ben Simmons and DFS at center, like that's pretty predictable. So I think just from that standpoint, sort of normalizing some of that, pairing his minutes with Schroeder as much as possible so you can get pick and roll stuff going is going to be the way. But encouraging, it's mostly just encouraging to see him back. Like there will be minutes for him. There will be minutes for him this season for sure. And they could just use him on the glass, like without a doubt.
One other player, and I agree with you. And it's just let's just see where it goes from here, because again, the thing that doesn't feel relevant right now will be so much more relevant after we get through some of these trades and after things pass. It's going to be Do you guys have a role with this team? If you're one of the younger players, do you have a role on this roster? And I don't know. Some fans have often speculated about like Day'Ron Sharpe being like one of those throw-in players in a trade because of the per minutes rebounding that he has. And you stick him on a roster where you go, hey, run in there and grab me 9 boards in 8 minutes. You go, okay, great. I can do that. And it feels a little bit different depending on roster construction. So we'll see where it goes from there. The other player I will just say before we get out the door on this game, Keon Johnson had a nice game. It's a quiet shooting performance, just 3 of 10, 2 of 6 from beyond the arc, though. 3 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, a block. Like, it's almost kind of a bummer that Keon Johnson was a player we've talked about and interested to see how he fits into it. But there's like 9 other guys that are more interesting or intriguing or long-term important to this roster. Like, former first-round pick, has some pedigree. And I like opportunities like this now, again, with long stretches, especially without Cam Thomas. Somebody's going to need to fill in these voids. It wasn't by any stretch a great game from Keon, but it's an opportunity for him to show that he could at least be a guy coming off the bench, playing 20-plus minutes in relief of Dennis Schroeder, in relief of maybe Shake Milton, and trying to carve out a role for himself. So these games are always silver lining for me when it comes to young players who at least show you something in their ability to be a consistent member of a roster and a contributor to a team.
Yeah, he just looks athletic. I think that it's funny. It's mostly
like he looks like
a size
he fits,
issue,
right? I mean, like he looks like he fits in the NBA as opposed to a guy that looks a little fish out of water.
Totally. And he was he was a first-round draft pick back in the day. Like the frame never really filled out. Like, and he never was able to just kind of like, it's like one of these tweener guards. And I think sometimes it's hard for some of these guys, is like decent on ball, not really an offensive sort of like engine, isn't really a connector, but can drive the lane, has crazy hops. Like there's certain things he can do well, but it's a little hard when if you're like, hey, if you're going to be this size and you're not going to be able to spend all your time on ball, unlocking other guys and pick and roll or like doing other stuff, you kind of just do run out of like places you can fit, right? Because it's just, and we see this a lot with guys, I say like these tweener guards, like he's like not exactly a prototypical shooting guard. He's also not a prototypical point guard. He's like somewhere in between those two things. And on certain teams, that's going to be okay. But for a lot of teams, like you're going to have a lot of other stuff kind of go right, because you're going to have defensive issues. You're going to have like unclear places of like where he's going to just totally fit in. So I think for like what they're doing now and his role, I think it's a good one, because it does show that he just has like NBA skills. But I can also understand why it's maybe not the most long-term thing ever, right, for this kind of guy, because it's just like, well, what does he do amazingly? It's like nothing really, right? But it's also, when you watch him, it's clear that he should be on the court. So I can see why like he was drafted on the higher side, and I can also see why multiple teams have sort of moved on from him also, right? Because you just kind of like, it's a big kind of a question mark about like how much of a floor raiser he is, and I really like watching him play.
Yeah, that's 100%. And it's one of those bummers that he probably is going to be best suited to always be a guy that can contribute and play, maybe not on the most competitive of teams, right? The more competitive your team gets, the more that you need these guys to slot into their roles. Probably harder to see him as being one of the first, 2 or 3 guys off a bench, as opposed to a guy that's going to play more minutes when you're a team that doesn't have deep playoff run aspirations. One thing I will just note here, humorously, Keon Johnson has played a total of 1,500 minutes in his career. He's played 102 games. 20% of his career minutes and games have been played this season for Brooklyn in these first 20 games. He's played 20 games. He's played 329 minutes. So he's only 22 years old. So again, sometimes you see, well, he's played for multiple teams and he's been in the league for a handful of years. That's great, but not unlike Cam Thomas for the Brooklyn Nets. Sometimes you got to take the step back and say, right, but how much consistency and opportunity has he had to show that he can develop? And for a lot of guys that played big minutes in college, it's a real adjustment and sometimes difficult to get over it's when your number gets called, not that your number gets called every single night. So good for Keon. We'll see how it plays out here, because again, plenty of injuries, going to be plenty of minutes for Brooklyn coming up here.
All right. We'll talk a little bit, some of the trade talk that's coming out here, especially around where where guys might be, like some of the value that might be getting assigned to guys like Schroeder, guys like Dorian Finney-Smith. Not amazing.
Looks like it's going back to reality. Looks like we're getting a little dose of reality, friends. So you get strap in for disappointment.
Not amazing, also not all that surprising. We'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you subscribe to on YouTube as well.
To have a comeback, you have to have a setback, and that comes from the sage-like master of Mr. T.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.